Yes, I certainly can. In terms of where we are on the science of understanding that complete carbon cycle through the farming system, you know, we know the basic mechanisms there, but it's still very hard to measure. One of the things we showed our international visitors on our field trip at the Dairy Summit was down at the Waikato to show what work Dairy New Zealand and Waikato University writers are doing on measuring those carbon fluxes. It's, you know, that will eventually get there. In the meantime, the government is extremely interested in keeping the emissions trading scheme as best tuned as possible as we move the science on. So, for example, the government is required to produce a report every year on the emissions trading scheme. The first report was out on Monday. And then it was originally every 5 years. It'll probably become more frequent than that. There is a second sort of structural review of the ETS. Now, the current one is being led by David Cagle. It's due to report in the next few weeks on whether those pricing mechanisms in the ETS are, and the free credits that all the trade exposed sectors get, so they're largely shielded from the cost of this in the ETS, is whether that's still tracking to make sure that our producers aren't disadvantaged against others. So the government's very focused on that because it wants to get those settings just right, as best it possibly can. And again, you know, you've got to make judgments along the way, but there's every goodwill and every intention to make those judgments speedily and as accurately as possible.
There was a question just down the front here.
It was made, but it was cold. I'm very concerned about the lignite. Just our government supporting it, isn't it?
It's hard to tell. I mean, the answer is yes, but they're not admitting to it. So, for example, I was asking the Prime Minister about this a few weeks ago, and he just sort of said, well, it's up to Solid Energy to make the case. But we know Solid Energy is working very hard on the case. And Solid Energy is being quite clever because it's doing it piecemeal. So, for example, the next small step in its grand scheme for Southland was a plant to turn lignite into solid fuel briquettes. So basically to dry out the lignite so it has a similar thermal value as coal. Now, the plant it needed to do that is small, and where it planned to do it, it was a compliant operation. So it was a non-notified resource consent, and it's just whistling through the regional council. So at some point, though, Solid Energy is going to have to put on the table elements of that plan which actually fully expose the economics, and which I think are really dodgy, and the environmental impact of it. And that's when I think a very big public debate is going to break out. And my sense of it is that this is going to be bigger than any other, judging by the response of people around the country. I think this is going to be a bigger issue than any other that we've seen in that intersection, environment and economics.
Okay. General questions either way. Yep.
Thank you. I don't mind who answers this question, but you must answer.
Me? No.
Rod can, and so can Jim.
Not the man.
Given that the majority of us don't like to change our current habits, and we don't like to get dragged out of our comfort zone, what likelihood do you think that central and local government will have enough bottle to force us to do the things we don't want to do because they're not politically astute?
I'll just make an observation. If you go back to 1911, the world was a totally different place than if you look at it now. So we don't think things change, but they do. and they do rapidly because of various pressures, whatever they are. The globe is running out of oil, where peak oil seems to have been 2005, 2007. You can see that prices are going up. There will be change.
One of the documents I refer to quite a lot is called Vision 2050 by the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. You need to Google Vision 2050, World Business Council. And in there, it's one particular chart is totally extraordinary in terms of across all of these issues like agriculture, energy, how we build things, how we get ourselves around, how much we've got to change over the next 40 years if by then 10 billion people are going to live in any kind of comfort on the planet. And so the scale of change that we need to make completely dwarfs anything we've ever done before. And I think that's, governments can play a role in trying to organise that, but my focus is very much on local responses, because we have to have communities that are able to discuss these issues and achieve a sense of common sense, a common understanding about what's at stake, a sense of common purpose about what can be done about it, and a sense of commonwealth about how we can benefit from that. And if, however small the community is around the country, starts to think about that kind of stuff and starts to act on it, and the mayor can help locally, and the regional council can help on a wider scale, and the national government can as well. But as long as we understand these issues and we're working down the right road to try and solve them, then we can scale that up from community to community. But for me, the absolute heart of it is to have communities around this country, similarly around the world, that can understand what common sense, common purpose, and commonwealth is actually about.
And I'll add the famous words of Mahatma Gandhi: what you do will be insignificant, but it is significant that you do it.
Yes, thank you. Next question, right?
Thank you, Rod and Jim. You both spoke about consequences that will happen way in the future, and yet we're already seeing the acidification of the ocean and pests that we haven't seen before, etc. Would you agree that these big forecasts that we're talking about way in the future could in fact be inconsequential, because we may be seeing really devastating consequences much earlier from these other effects that you're talking about, pestilence and acidification, wiping out the seafood? And should we not be making more significant changes in our governments, for example, putting a moratorium on dairy farming until such time as this scientific research can actually put something on the table?
Right, well, that's a very interesting question. I won't talk about moratoriums or anything, but Ross Garneau, when he released a series of reports in Australia, he's the government's climate change advisor there, and a very talented economist. He basically said that scientists and their results are reticent, meaning that what the consensus scientific opinion is more conservative than what is actually happening. And he said, unfortunately, he did a report in 2008, but in 2011, the scientific information was much more robust. Now, I showed you, for example, the projections for sea ice against the actual measurements. And what we're finding is that the climate system is moving faster than consensus science is indicating. The second thing I'd say at the moment, the climate system is actually moving faster than the political process, unfortunately.
I would say you're absolutely right, that things are moving very fast, the effects are here and now. I could come along and try and scare the hell out of you, but lots of other people can do that. I'm much more interested, I'm much more excited about what the opportunity is to just do things a whole lot better. And so that's why I spend most of my time focusing on what we have to do, but what's also possible and exciting to do, rather than just get people so paranoid about this whole stuff that they give up.
Thank you, Rod. I just wanted to know, when there is 75% of the farmer are sustainable dairy farming practice there, who say we are part of the solution. What do you think that means?
It means that as dairy farmers, they believe that dairy products have an important role to play in nutrition, and therefore they want to keep producing them, or their cows to produce them. But they also believe that it's possible for them to understand how they can improve their farming practices. So what they're doing is sustainable in all senses of the word, not just sort of environmentally, but economically as well, and actually socially too, because you can't have dairy farming unless you have rural communities with people who want to work on those dairy farms. So these are people who think in those terms. And I think they do have a pretty good grip on the issues, and they're far from knowing what all the answers are, but the more they're focused on those questions over the last few years, the faster they've found the answers.
And right at the back.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to ask you to answer a question. It's clear that as we go forward, rural communities are going to have to become a bit more robust, or certainly more resilient, so far, and probably also because we may be seeing issues equal, I think, with the availability of affordable power and energy, which haven't played into the equation so much today. And I wonder, as a community, what did you see across the country as a whole, the role of local government, perhaps Richard can answer this also, in adding over the next 10, 20 years to making those rural communities a little more resilient?
This is an incredibly broad brush. What you see around New Zealand, and you see it elsewhere in the world, people respond in different ways. Some people just believe the answer is to become totally self-sufficient locally, and so whatever mayhem eventuates in the world, they'll be all right. You could do that, but I'm not sure necessarily a life without drugs or computers or cars is something that many of us would necessarily want. So trying to be engaged in the world so we can play a part but get some of those wider benefits, I think that's really important. Yet, how a local community responds in small ways, like energy efficiency or